I'd like to welcome all of you here tonight to a series of what will be 2 evening panels that are part of a small week-long working conference being held here at Harvard this week on women, religion, and social change, involving women from a variety of countries, from India, from Indonesia, Thailand, Ghana, Israel, South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Japan, GDR, the Netherlands, and North America. We women come from a variety of religious traditions and cultural backgrounds and are here this week to discuss the relation of religion to change, to the social and political changes for which women are working in different parts of the world. What are the moral and political issues about which women are most deeply concerned, and what is the relation of religion, of moral and ethical values to those issues? While we come from a variety of religious traditions, we are not the swamis and the archbishops and the rabbis of those traditions, but are here to articulate what we think about our moral and religious backgrounds as women. There are 4 women here tonight who have taken the lead in various ways in the moral and ethical issues of their own cultures, and issues which we find indeed to be global issues. Each of these women will speak for 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions and to comments. First, we have Cicely Bach, who is a moral philosopher, a writer, and a teacher, who is a lecturer on moral reasoning in the core curriculum here at Harvard, who teaches courses in ethics not only to undergraduates but also in the medical school and here in the Kennedy School. She has written the book Lying, Moral Choice in Public and Private Life, as well as the recently published book Secrets, on the ethics of concealment and revelation. Here we have Radha Bhatt, who brings to us a Gandhian perspective on peacemaking. Devaki Jain, who was originally slated to speak tonight, has asked that we seize this opportunity to hear her sister Radha, who is not only a Gandhian thinker, but is a Gandhian worker in India for 30 years with women of the Lakshmi Ashram in Almora in the Kumaon Hills of North India. She has been actively involved in nonviolent forms of bringing about social change among village people, illiterate people, and yet, as we find, some of the most fearless people in India. Immediately to my right is Jean Zaru, who comes to us from a long and worldwide tradition of peacemaking and brings to us a Quaker perspective on making peace. The perspective of the Friends is one that many of us know, both here in the United States and abroad. And Jean, a Palestinian, is an educator in the Friends School in Ramallah on the West Bank. And like Cicely Bach, though in something of a different context, Jean teaches ethics to both Muslim and Christian students in the Friends School in Ramallah. And finally, we have Helen Caldecott, a leader of the Physicians for Social Responsibility in the movement against the production, the testing, and stockpiling of nuclear weapons. From 1971 to 1976, Dr. Caldecott, an Australian, launched and led the campaign against the French atmospheric testing in the Australian islands. And in the United States, as most of you know, she has done much to make the anti-nuclear movement here a people's movement and has instilled in so many of us the sense that these decisions about the future of ourselves and our children is much too important a decision to leave to politicians and bureaucrats and experts. So I think we have with us tonight 4 very important perspectives on making peace, women in the midst of conflict. And so I'd like to introduce to you our first speaker, Cecil Labonte.
Well, thank you very much, Diana. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk with all of you, and I do hope that we will have a discussion with all of you at the end of our remarks. I want to begin by talking about how one woman took a stand against violence. She linked the many ways in which it affects our lives and makes us take it so for granted that we become even more blind to suffering and even more tempted to avoid thinking about dangers to our collective survival. Astrid Lindgren is her name. She is Swedish and a writer of children's books. Translated into many of the world's languages, her books have entranced readers everywhere. And in 1978, she received the German Booksellers' Peace Prize. Astrid Lindgren spoke out in her acceptance speech against the brutality that pervades so much of what children play with and read and see all around them. She had in mind the many war toys and the games in which mass killing is taken for granted, but also the concentration on violence in the media, the resort by world leaders to ever more aggressive rhetoric, and the drift toward a more and more militarized world with modern weapons of mass destruction sold in ever greater volume, fanning wars, impoverishing nations, helping dictatorial regimes oppress the citizens of their own countries. She ended with a story about a mother and her son. This mother had never gone along with the biblical saying, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." Such dictates, she believed, merely offered parents false excuses for beating their children into submission. But one day, this woman's son had done something that made even her lose patience. Deciding that he did deserve a spanking, she asked him to go out to find some branches with which she might whip him. The little boy left and was gone a long time. At last, he came back weeping and said, "I didn't find any good branches, Mother, but here is a stone you can throw at me." Then the mother saw herself with her child's eyes. The boy must have thought that since she actually wanted to injure him, she might as well do so with a stone. At that moment, she made a vow to herself, no more violence, and she put the stone on a shelf in the kitchen as a reminder. We can all grasp the threat this boy felt, and we can share his mother's understanding of her own part in that threat. Indeed, we can grasp the danger to one child from the throwing of one stone much more easily than the infinitely greater threat of devastation to hundreds of millions of children, women and men in a nuclear war. We have all experienced this difficulty of facing such a threat, of thinking about it, reading about it, responding to it in any way, to the point that it has often blocked out for many of us all awareness of the danger. Ask children today, and many will tell you that they do not expect to live out their lives without a nuclear war. But they will often go on to tell you that they don't think much about this fact, since there seems to be so little anyone can do about it. This is an extreme form of the defense mechanism known as denial. It is, as one doctor has said about patients who cannot confront the possibility of serious illness or death, a pulling down of the shades. Doctors estimate that at least 20% of all patients who are told about being at serious risk of death pull down the shades thus, to the point where a few days later they have no memory of having been told. Faced with intolerable anxiety, they have blocked out the information. For some, the blockage is but a temporary reflex, allowing time to regroup their forces and to begin to take it all in. For others, the shades turn out to be permanently lowered. We have witnessed a massive pulling down of the shades in the face of the danger of nuclear war and collective extinction. But there is nothing temporary about this process. The denial is relentless and pervasive, and it engages a far greater proportion than the 20% of sufferers from serious illness who are unable to confront the risk of their own death. Whole populations have lowered the shades and go about life as if the risk to human survival were not one that required immediate response. Government leaders pull down the shades too, and in the seeming dusk, they play international politics as usual. But in the last few years, we have seen growing efforts to pierce through the collective denial while there is still time, to help raise those shades that are now so firmly drawn. Women have been in the forefront of these efforts in many countries. We are witnessing an extraordinary coming together of people from all walks of life, all opinions and faiths. It is as if more and more people had decided that they can do something about the danger, that giving in to a sense of powerlessness is not only self-defeating, but profoundly unworthy of the ideals they hold. Against these efforts, against the teach-ins and the vigils and the town meeting resolutions and the marches, strong voices were raised at first. Editorials castigated these efforts as romantic, confused, ill-informed, impractical. Scholars pleaded for a debate among experts, and above all, for an avoidance of popular movements, demonstrations, and marches. Critics taunted as sentimental anyone who dared to speak out without what they took to be the proper background and knowledge. One hesitates to think with what contempt they would greet a writer of books for children who presumed to take a stand against war and violence. Those who called on us then to leave matters to experts and to governments were asking us to draw the shades down again, and thus to return to the easeful state of collective denial we already know so well. They appealed to our fear of seeming naive, our awareness of how much we did not know, and our distaste for struggling against seemingly hopeless odds. But without popular pressure, experts and governments will never feel the urgency of the current problems. They too struggle with denial and with fears of confronting the reality of the nuclear threat. A generation ago, it was not until mothers and fathers and children protested the world over against radioactive fallout that the treaty banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere was finally signed. Likewise, in our period, governments will not negotiate in full seriousness, full awareness, until individuals in innumerable groups bring home to them the urgency of doing so. There are signs now that the efforts to raise the lowered shades are succeeding. Many more individuals are now aware of what is at stake. Communities and church groups and organizations across the world are addressing the threat of nuclear war. Fewer experts now regard the work of these groups as merely naive and meddlesome, and governments feel the pressure. They can no longer count on being able to press the arms race without being held accountable. The United States Catholic Bishop's pastoral letter is an example of an effort to inform, raise consciousness, discuss and advise both individuals and governments with respect to war and peace. To individuals, it speaks on such matters as refusal of military service, working in armaments industries and in weapons research. To governments and policymakers and all citizens, it speaks on the morality of nuclear deterrence and on that of aiming weapons of mass destruction at civilian populations. And it calls, for the first time in a document of this kind, to the best of my knowledge, for a climate of opinion in the United States which will make it possible to express profound sorrow over the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Press accounts of the bishop's letter have often left out another side of what they said, one which they stressed as equal in importance to the emergency over nuclear weapons, the role of the arms race as what they call an act of aggression upon the poor. War preparations on the present scale not only risk death, perhaps in the near future, to countless persons across the globe, right now, these war preparations threaten jobs, health, food supplies, and even the most minimal standards of living for many. The arms traffic is draining funds away from desperately needed social programs in many countries. Some nations now forgo vital imports of food, fuel, spare parts, or medicine, according to the Brandt Commission's report entitled Common Crisis, because of vast military expenditures. And the weapons that governments acquire thus are often used to quell internal critics as well as to do battle with neighboring states. The poorest societies are often the most victimized in this militarization of large and small states. Just as we have to struggle to overcome our reluctance to face the risks of nuclear conflagration in the future, so we must work to overcome a similar reluctance when it comes to the actual suffering that is the lot of so many right now. The task of making peace, as the bishops point out, will be sidetracked if we concentrate on military strategies and on bargaining positions with respect to nuclear weapons alone. Peace is not merely the absence of full-scale nuclear war. It must include, at the very least, the absence of what is euphemistically called conventional war as well, and true security for the many who are now the victims of oppression and persecution, even by their own governments or fellow citizens. If any group can help others overcome this reluctance to confront both the future dangers and the present suffering, I believe that the women who have traveled to this international conference from so many countries can do so. Perhaps it is only by learning about concrete experiences on the part of such witnesses and participants that we can go beyond the statistics and fully understand and feel the conditions that they are working to change. Whether it be through hearing about such joint work as to try to save a village forest in India, or to combat the labor patterns and laws that destroy families in South Africa, or to strengthen the respect for human rights in the Middle East, these women have shown us and one another the subtlety and variety of their methods and the ingenuity with which they put them to use. It is by helping work of this kind to spread and to find new support that it will be possible to reverse the rule of poverty, fear, and violence under which so many now live. Much of the work of these women is carried out with an express commitment to nonviolence, but not all. And here is another benefit that may flow from this conference. It may help us to sort out what we understand by violence and to consider all the alternatives to violent means of achieving one's goals. It may also help us to agree more than we do now on whether there are times when such means are unavoidable. Finally, it may give us a chance to consider when methods that we might all regard as nonviolent are nevertheless coercive and used for unjust causes. Let me return for a moment to that woman in the story with which I began, the woman who put a stone on her shelf as a reminder of her vow, no more violence. We all know what she meant. Not that she could magically do away with violence in her own life, let alone her society or the entire world. Not that she might not defend herself or her child, if need be, with the very stone she had put aside, or some other weapon, but rather that she would not use violence to injure, nor to punish when other alternatives existed, and that she would try anew to perceive violence in all its guises, work against it, and do away with it whenever possible. Many critics of her position would caricature it to make it stand for complete rejection of all means of self-defense. Such a position can hardly suffice in today's world against heavily armed opponents, least of all in the international arena. Those who caricature the stance for nonviolence thus often believe that Since they have demolished the weak arguments for complete abandon of self-protection, they have thereby justified any amount of militarization and violence that they happen to support. Such a conclusion hardly follows from their arguments, and it opens the door to innumerable excesses and abuses. It is only by taking a strong initial stance against violence that one can go on to examine exceptional circumstances under which it might nevertheless still be justified, while remaining alert to the excesses and the abuses, and while searching at all times for nonviolent alternatives. In this regard, I was most interested in an account of Gandhi's position on nonviolence that was offered at an early meeting of this international conference. The account holds that Gandhi, far from denying the presence of violence in the world, meant to carve out spaces, territories in human interaction where it would nevertheless not be used, territories within the family, within the community, among friends and enemies, between governments and citizens. Once these territories have been thus carved out, they can be enlarged, extended, and become models for others. This may be what is happening now, when individuals and professional groups and religious groups are rededicating themselves to the pursuit of nonviolence. It may be also what lies behind the force of geographical regions declaring themselves free from nuclear weapons, as many are proposing for Scandinavia and other parts of Europe and Latin America. Such efforts strike some, once again, as quixotic and unrealistic. But I believe that they only seem that way in that never land dreamed up by those who think of themselves as political realists, a land in which one has to choose between only two alternatives, an impossible ideal of complete nonviolence on the one hand, and on the other hand, a free-for-all of arms build-up and continued hostilities. We have to learn to perceive all the possibilities that lie in between, all the nonviolent means short of that unreachable ideal. And this conference is contributing to just that perception. And in closing, I would like to quote William Blake, who wrote of how we take part in our own difficulties in perceiving. He said, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as it is, infinite. Instead, man has closed himself up till he sees all things through the narrow chinks of his cavern. Those who would have us give up or give over our concern for peace would consign us to remain without a struggle in just the condition Blake set forth. In the efforts to open up those chinks of the cavern and to see all as it is, infinite, everyone has a part to play, including writers of books for children, scientists, scholars, men and women from every region, every culture. Without them, there will be no permanent chance for making peace." Thank you.
Our next speaker is Radha Bhatt from the Lakshmi Ashram in Almora, India, and she's going to be joined at the outset by Devaki and Dina. Radha Bhatt.
Sisters and brothers, we from India always believe that we are not in the nations but out of the nations, and we all are the sisters and brothers as human beings. And here we are going to just sing a small 4 lines which really tells in Gandhian perspective or Gandhian base that what is the essential thing for making peace. This is Gandhian base, but he has got it from Indian culture and Indian religions. So my sister Devki and me are going to sing this. Before that, I would like to tell you what it means. It means that peace is not a point of only nation or society or individual, but everybody has to work, has to be careful about making peace every day and every minute. And what he has to do? He has to take care of his own behavior in such way that he could be careful taking steps about what he is going to do in his life every time. So these are the 11 vows, or 11, not vows, but 11 things to do, what one has to remember all the time and make himself according to these 11 things. These are non-violence, truth, non-covetousness, celibacy, and not collecting many things for one person's use, and working with oneself's body as much as one can do, and to cultivate detachment and complete fearlessness, equality of religions, home product goods to be used, and to be loving for every human being, not feeling that no, he is untouchable to me, he is somehow far from me, and humility. And these are all 11 vows or 11 steps or 11 virtues what one has to take in his own life. So we are going to sing it in a way in Sanskrit, which it is originally from Sanskrit. Ahimsa satya steya brahmacharya sangraha sharira shrama aswada sarvatra bhayavarjanam sarvadharma samanatva swadeshi sparsha bhavana vinamra vratanishta se yekadash sevyahe. Coming from so far, as India is in such a east part of the world, I feel that maybe I am not going to touch those all issues which you feel in this country are more touching to you. But still I think there are few universal things which are the same all everywhere, in any country or in any society or in any culture or everywhere. So that is, in my mind, the first thing is really that all over the world people are really threatened for the lack of peace. They feel that if peace is not there, what is going to be of their own lives and of their own beings? So we all are really threatened. But I don't know if we really think about it, that what is the cause and how we can really solve it, how we can solve the problem. the first thing in my mind is this race of armament, of what you call militarism, or nuclear weapons, or using so much money of every country into the military management, or all these things. And of course, in Western countries mostly, and also in some of the Eastern countries, people are protesting it, talking against it, and trying to stop it. They try their best, I feel. But to my mind, this is one issue, this is one problem, and very big problem. But at the same time, I give the same importance to another problem, and that is the environmental problem. And this problem is so dangerous, is as dangerous as this armament, or these missiles, or these weapons, nuclear weapons, and all these things are. So I just want to point out only these two things mostly, that how we are going to work upon it, and how we are be able to stop those two things, these two problems, how we are going to solve them. So for first point, this armament and these missiles and these nuclear weapons and all these things, we say that this is the fault of the policymakers, or the governments, or the politicians. And I know, of course, they are very, very strong. Of course, we people elect them among ourselves. We give them the responsibility to look after our country. We send them over there. But what they don't do the thing which we want to do. We send them there, and they are doing what they like to do, and we have no power to bring them down, say no, that we don't need. That we don't need really. So this is where I am so different than you. So now you can see me and listen better. So that is one thing, what we can do among ourselves, that we can be so powerful that the politicians, the policymakers will do as we like to do. Because we have sent them there, and somewhere in 5 years, somewhere in 3 years, we are again going to send them over there. So I feel that people's power should be more stronger than the power of the government or state. But this is our somehow not a good fortune, we are really unlucky that I don't know, but I feel that even in America or in India or any other countries, these state government politicians, or what we call them policymakers, they are stronger than the people. So we have to think of this problem, and we have to think of how can we be able to bring that strength in the people. Will it be with the help of the guns, some more weapons, maybe more strong weapons than the nuclear weapons, because the nuclear weapons are there, they are piled up like this, and bombs and many, many things. Then just against that strength or that power, what is the power we are going to introduce, and which will be the power of million people? So I feel that will be the non-violence. And I feel if the people will be so much strong, not bodily, not physically. I don't mean that with the weapons and all these things, but I mean with the spirits from inside, that really we need the peace. We want to have the peace, and we are going to sacrifice everything for making peace. Then I think we will be more strong. We will be stronger than the governments. So that is the one thing I feel myself that that should come, because it is our bad luck, I can say, or maybe I don't know which kind of culture and which kind of setup and which kind of political thing we have brought in this world, that now people have not their original eyes. They look through the government eyes. If India says that Arabic countries are good, then all Indians will say, oh yes, Arabic countries are good. They are on the right side. They are doing all well and good and everything is good. And if they say, no, no, they are bad, they are doing, their policy is not the honest one, or not in the on the justice point and all these things, then every Indian will say, okay, that's right, we understand it, because we have given everything in their hands. Even we have just surrendered our minds and brains and hearts and everything to them. So I feel that we have to break down those nationalities, those boundaries, which are really making us a kind of slaves, because we are not really owners of our own minds and our own thoughts and our own ideas. We are just thinking or making our ideas on others' reactions. So I feel the first thing that people should meet to the people. Indian people to American people to Russian people and Chinese people and everybody. I feel that Chinese and Indians, what is the difference into the people? What is difference there? Nothing. They are farmers, we are farmers, they have got their families, we have got our families, and which kind of enmity and hatred was built up by those people who have no idea about the people, I think. So I hope I was able to explain you people that what I mean by breaking the national boundaries. I mean people should meet people in their original forms, as they are human people. And if we meet each other in that way, I think making peace will be not so difficult. The other thing, for these, against those missiles or anything, what you call it, the nuclear weapons and all these things, I think we are also responsible for those things. Of course, these policymakers are responsible for a great part of it, but we are also responsible, because it is not only the question of in one day one person decided and then this whole thing was started and then everything was just, every weapon was prepared. It is not like that. It is the whole frame of our social and individual life, because what we like to do these days, of course, there are countries who are poor countries, there are countries who are rich countries, and in one country even you will find people who are very rich and you will find people who are very poor. Some are dying because they are eating too much, some are dying because they are starving. And at the same time, the people who have gone so step by step, it was not in one day they went to that standard of life, but they went step by step. And now they don't understand, they not give a thought to this everyday's life, that how much natural resources they are using. How much? And then they say, these poor people, how can be they starving? We can't understand. But they don't understand that we are eating too much. That's why they are starving. We are using too much clothes. We are using too much of everything, many, many things which we are using every day. And that is somehow the whole frame of our life, whole setup of our life. I don't know the words, but I feel it from inside. And it's not only the question of developed countries or developing countries, but it is the question of even inside a country, you will find out the people who are so much using the natural resources, and you will find out a person, a poor person, who I think maybe not even 1% of the natural resources is getting in his own life. So this unbalance, this kind of lifestyle, I think we should to think and we should to decide. That's why we were singing this small song, because this says that what you should do individually every day in your life to make peace. The other thing is, why do we use so many natural resources? Because we have made our mind that, we like an easy life, easygoing life. We don't like, first, I think years back we were walking miles and miles, but now we think, no, we can't do that. We need more time. We want to take the bus and or train, or in more developed countries, we feel, no, we want to have a car, and then in a few more years, we are so much developed that we feel, no, we need 2 cars because we are 2 people in our family. So how far we are going to go in this race, in this way of life? So this life, which is very much easygoing life, and everybody, if there is a poor person, a poor farmer from India, he has got the same idea. He thinks, today I'm doing this and going so many miles, I must write to the government that they should build up a motor road here and send a bus here. If there is 1 bus, no, we need 2 regular buses coming here and going towards the town. So this is the mentality of everybody in the world, that we don't like to stop somewhere, that our easy life should go on, as far as we can do. And this easy being or easy living bodily makes that we are so much perturbed in our minds, in our hearts. Of course, our body is very nicely living in the nice houses or central heated houses or nice chairs or anything, and getting good food. But we are so much perturbed in our minds and in our hearts, and, that is how we are leading our lives. And I think we should think, everybody, we means you and me and everybody, should think that what I am going to do for making peace. I think you must have seen this Gandhi film, many of you. I don't go into the whole detail, but I want to just remind you that scene where Gandhi came from South Africa, and then he was using this big turban over here and having long clothes, and for many days he was using this. I don't know how many years, but then he saw people in India who haven't got the clothes, proper clothes. Even he saw one woman who was having only 1 sari. She hasn't got another sari to change this sari and wash it. And then he decided, no, I don't have the right to put on such a big turban on my head. And I think that approach is the basic approach. If you are really having some urgency in your minds and in your hearts for making peace, And if you are really have that kind of heart that you feel, of course, we all are sisters and brothers. So this what I am saying, I feel that is, we have to think about the social injustice, the social, the unbalance of our social structure. And if we think of that, I feel that we will be very successful into making the peace. The second thing I talked about in the beginning, that is the environmental disturbances. I don't know, and I don't want to go into other problems, but because I am coming from Himalayas, from those high mountains, which have been a beloved place, a beloved mountain for everybody in the world. Many people like it because it's very, very beautiful. Many people like because it is very high peaks up there. Some people like because they want to climb up there. Some people like because they feel it gives very nice spiritual atmosphere. So there are many, many things about it. So this is not only Indian, Nepalese mountain. It is a mountain which was loved by everybody. And what is happening in this mountain nowadays? How its face is just scrubbed out. Its skin is just peeled out. And of course, we feel very sad for this. Not only me, but the women, the people of those areas, those villages. You will ask me, what are you doing there then? Because you are witnessing this whole thing there. What are we doing? We are doing not really very much. We are not so strong, I think. But the women of those areas are doing something against it. I will tell you one story of those women who are illiterate, who have not seen the bus even. They are in such interior part that they never got the chance to go into a bus. Or I remember once they went to a fair, and then there was the first time the bus was coming, and everybody went there and said, oh, this is the bus. It has got 4 wheels. Like this. And they looked it from this side, that side, and came a car. Then they said, this must be the child of this bus. And then they were so funnily very, very happy and said, okay, we have to ride upon it and we have to go somewhere. They wanted to experience it. So this kind of women are really concerned about the Himalayan disturbances, or these all things what are going there. The main things which are happening there is that the forests are cut down so to that extent that now the soil is washed out towards the plain side, and the water level is gone down. So in many places, I think so many places that I can remember that in my childhood I saw a nice spring flowing down with the clear and nice water, cool water. And now there is no water left. Everything is dried up. So that is the problem of those Himalayan peaks. And there were the government policy is like this, because you don't, maybe you will think that I'm always against the government, but of course I have to say if there is something like that. Once in a village so far up in the interior, they asked the government forest department officers to allow them, to permit them to cut 2 trees for making their plows. You know, they use these wooden plows. And this is very necessary. Without the plow, they can't cultivate the land. So, and without cultivating the land, they can't have the food. So this was so essential, so necessary. But these government officers, they say, no, it's not possible because it is not allowed. And then afterwards, in 2 months, they permitted a contractor, a businessman who was making sports goods or sports equipments like hockeys or hockey sticks, for his business, and he was allowed. And then these people, village people, opposed it. And of course, they are illiterate, so they were misguided, and they were asked to the district headquarters to come on and make a talk, and they wanted to finalize it. So they went, every man of that village went to the district headquarters, and these women were at home, and just that moment came the contractor's sawman and the men with the axes to cut down those trees, because men were not there, and they were the people who were against it. But then women thought, what we can do? They knew that their men were against it, and they saw that people were coming. So they went rushing up there, climbing up to the mountains, and said, please, don't do that. Our men are in the district headquarters, and when they come back, please, till then, you stop it. They said, no, we know they are there. That's why we have come here. So we are going to cut down those trees. Then women have no way, but they have a heart with love to those forests. And they said, of course, you can cut them down. We can't do anything, but we will hang those trees. We will flung our bodies across, around those trees, and then your axes will come upon our trees first, and then they will cut the trees. So this was the work of some village women who don't know anything about ecology, about anything else. So this was the starting of a movement called Chipko movement. That is Hindi word, but the meaning is hug the tree. So just in one sentence, I will ask you, do something by yourself. And maybe, I think, we will be successful in bringing peace in this world, and we will be living together for many, 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 many years as sisters and brothers. Thank you.
Thank you, Radha. Our next speaker is Jean Zaru from Ramallah on the West Bank.
I would like to greet you in Arabic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May God's peace, mercy, and blessings be unto you. In the search for peace in the Middle East, some people begin with the Camp David agreements, others with a new status for Jerusalem. Still others see peace primarily in the withdrawal by Israel in whole or in part from lands occupied by Israel in 1967. Many others start by speaking of withdrawal of Israel from Lebanon. Palestinians begin with the loss of their lands and the violation of their human rights. There are over 3 million Palestinians, half of which are uprooted and forcibly thrown out more than once, and the other half subjugated and oppressed and strangers in their own land. Chaim Weizmann, later to become the first president of Israel, once remarked long before the establishment of the Jewish state that the world would judge Zionists by the way they treated the Arabs of Palestine. It was a wise utterance, but half a century was to pass before the world gained a clear picture of the relationship between Jews and Arabs in Palestine. but the increased awareness of the injustice suffered by us and the results in terms of discrimination and spiritual and material hardship has been one important factor in bringing about a reappraisal of international attitudes towards the Arab-Israeli conflict. There are several reasons why all of us should be concerned with this conflict and work towards peace in the Middle East. One, the Arab-Israeli conflict is the cause of an explosive situation which could be a threat to world peace. It now affects the lives of millions of people in the Middle East. If it widens, it could affect the lives of tens of millions of people elsewhere. Two, several governments support Israel militarily, politically, and financially. Each individual has the right, if not the duty, to know the facts in order to judge whether the support which his or her government is extending to Israel is giving for a legitimate cause, and whether this support is in the long run in favor of Israeli citizens or in favor of peace. Three, the Palestine question has been on the agenda of the UN since 1947. Many resolutions have been adopted, and nothing was implemented. Therefore, every individual has a responsibility, directly or indirectly, for the action or inaction of his or her government. Four, the present-day struggle for human rights all over the world, for us and for others, is a struggle in which all Christians must engage if we are to be faithful to the demands of the gospel on us in our time. Five, in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the concept of the divine nature existing in harmonious relationship with human nature and the natural order has been a dominant one. The teachings of these religions of my part of the world helped undergird the belief that human beings have rights. Created in the image of God, our value comes from this likeness. God's nature as loving, free, and just. God's purpose to liberate human life from inhuman conditions which exist because humans of free will have chosen behavior that disrupts the intended harmony which provides peace, justice, and freedom for all. As a Palestinian Quaker woman, native of the Holy Land, I have been confronted all my life with structures of injustice. These political, cultural, economic, and social structures have been at work in a destructive way throughout our community and have caused so much of spiritual as well as physical suffering for many, including myself. I started to think about this. If there is that of God in every person, why is there so much evil and darkness in the world? Why is it hard for us to see that of God in others? My inward struggle was reflected in my outward action, and I became so sensitive and so aware of the suffering which reflects the evils which plague the human race. But it opened me also to God's redeeming love and activity. Involvement in any action takes an effort, and there is always a cost or a price to pay. Am I ready to pay the price to share the suffering of others? Suffering for me can be bearable if it is for the cause of liberation to find a new community with each other and with God. I do realize that those who operate the structures of oppression are dependent on the people they oppress and are equally in need of liberation and God's grace. Yet, it seems to me that the will and strength to end the oppression comes from those who bear it in their own lives, rather than from the privileged persons and nations. But where do we begin? If life in its fullness, if the children of God, wherever they are, created in the image of God, are our brothers and sisters, what do we do to preserve the dignity of their lives? What do we do to the arms race? What do we do when, in the name of national security, the scarce resources are used to buy weapons instead of combating poverty and hunger? What do we say when these arms sales, promoted by industrialized nations, are often used for internal repression, violation of human rights, and wars within a country and between neighboring countries? What do we do when our style of life or our silence is the cause of the presence of war without arms, where the victims are millions of people who are dying from hunger and poverty? What about social justice? Can there be peace between the starving and the affluent? Between the oppressor and oppressed? Occupier and occupied? Can arms bring security or keep peace? Are we concerned when the Bible is abused in a pagan way to worship all kinds of false gods like money, material wealth, race, and other idols? What do we do when individualistic interests are often justified by quoting biblical passages out of their historical context, of their human rights and human worth? We must let our hearts be moved by the anguish and suffering of our sisters and brothers throughout the world. How can we bear the pain? And where do we look for hope? Is there anything we can do to solve our present political chaos and the crisis in our world? Is there anything we can do to stop wars of all kinds? Let us take a look into ourselves, for the outward situation is merely an expression of the inward state. It requires great self-denial and resignation of ourselves to God to be committed to peace and to nonviolent action to bring about change. This technique may have no positive effect, and it may lead to outward defeat. Whether successful or not, it will bring suffering. But if we believe in nonviolence as the true way of peace and love, we must make it a principle not only of individual, but of national and universal conduct. But we should try to do so without any feeling of moral superiority, for we know how soon we may stumble when we are put to the test. We may talk about peace, but if we are not transformed inwardly, if we still want position, power, if we are motivated by greed, if we are nationalistic, if we are bound by beliefs and dogmas for which we are willing to destroy others, we cannot have peace in our world. Living under military occupation has made me go through deep self-searching, and I have been confronted with three loyalties. The first, loyalty to Christ, who calls us to love our enemy. The second, loyalty, calls us to aid fellow men or women in need or trouble. The third, loyalty, calls us to love our country, its people, and its way of life. This loyalty prevents us from being willing to aid our invader. In our situation, no one can set rules for us to follow. But what we can do is to testify that in our experience, the Spirit of God leads us into the truth and gives us the needed guidance in every situation. We have gone through circumstances of great privation, anxiety, and suffering. All these seemed at times to weaken my dependence on God. But what joy and hope I gain when I know wherever I am, whether in affluent circumstances or in poverty, whether I have personal liberty or not, I am under the guiding hand of God, and God has a service for me to render wherever God has placed me. I call myself a Quaker or a friend, and friends throughout history maintained a testimony for peace. War, we say, is contrary to the mind of Christ, and it is laid upon us to live in the virtue of that life and power that wins through love and not war. This is not an easy testimony, for it has three aspects. One, to refuse to take part in acts of war ourselves. Two, to strive to remove the causes of war. Three, to use the way of love open to us to promote peace and heal wounds. But how can I interpret this pacifism to my children and my students when we are all victims of violence? How can I have peace within when I worry so much about life in general and the lives of my family members? How can I have peace within when others label my people as terrorists and justify our oppression by quoting the Bible? When I have peace within, it is not because I approve of the violence around me. It is not because I sit in silence and accept all the injustices. It is just the way I am liberated to help my people. It is when I have the strength to endure and the strength to attempt to love all women and men that I really feel that peace. I see things differently now. I know the oppressor is not freer than the oppressed. Both live in fear and do not have peace. Others cannot bring us peace. No government, no army, no country, no leader is going to give us peace. What will bring us peace is inward transformation that will lead to outward action. Our miseries are not going to stop by our disapproval. If we see the urgency for immediate action, then only we will transform ourselves, and peace will come when we are peaceful, when we are at peace with our neighbors. And as our shrinking world makes us all near neighbors, we should be growingly aware of two facts about our natures as peoples of this world. One is that we are very different from one another in color, lifestyles, cultures, and beliefs. The other, we are exceedingly alike. there is a fantastic range of common needs and desires, fears and hopes that bind us together in our humanness, and the well-being of each is so interrelated to the well-being of others. Through the ages, people have engaged in a universal search for ultimate meaning in life, but have turned this search into a struggle, into wars to death to gain dominance for a particular ideology, religion, or nation. Our age of unparalleled advancement in education, science, and technology has been an age of enormous violence. Meanwhile, the need for imaginative understanding, simple trust, and creative cooperation was never more urgent. Maybe the time has come when we should unite in certain common affirmations of life, and this might be: 1. A pledge of honor and respect for every race, culture, religion, and individual. No exclusiveness. 2. Recognition of the claim of every individual upon the resources of the earth for the necessities of human survival, and the moral obligation of the more fortunate to share with the less fortunate. 3. The right of every individual for the responsible use of talents, energies, and resources for the benefit of the community. 4. Commitment to the search for universal values, however differently expressed, that may enable the individual and the community to overcome greed, power, and self-seeking. 5. Affirmation of the presence of a spirit of hope and compassion, available to all, by which our lives may be made more whole, more creative, more harmonious, as we draw directly upon that power around us and within us and within all life. We cannot live a day without saying yes or no, for death or for life, for war or for peace. But the choice is ours. There is no compromise. To postpone or evade decision is to decide. To hide the matter is to decide. To compromise is to decide. There is no escape, and this is our challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Helen Caldecott.
I feel humbled by Jean's speech. I think that she said it all. It's God in our souls, and it's listening, and it's every day saying I will or I won't. And as she said, to put it off is making a decision. It's to say I won't. To hide or deny is to say I won't. And every day we have to think of our lives and what we're doing, especially here in this country. Now, I'm Australian, and many of us on this panel are not Americans. And every time I come back to this country, I gasp at the affluence. I just gasp. And Australia's pretty affluent. but nothing like this country. And as I listened to Jean's speech and others, I think I realized that most Americans don't really know how the rest of the world lives. They think that the way they live is how everybody lives, and it's their God-given right to live like that. And I don't think they know how much of the world they're plundering to live like they are. 7% of the world's population here uses 42% of the world's natural resources to live like we live, and I'm one of you. And it's really frightening. And it's not right, because 2/3 of the world's children are malnourished and starving right now. 2/3 of the world's children. And when they're malnourished as little ones, babies, their brains don't develop properly, and they grow up mentally retarded. We spent about 10 days in Cuba in 1980, and in Cuba they've done a wonderful thing. When Batista was removed from power by Castro and others, about 90% of the people were illiterate. Hookworm and malaria were endemic. People were starving. There was no healthcare system. Now they're all well fed. There's almost 100% literacy. The healthcare program is so good that your Surgeon General went down there to inspect it so that it might be used as a model for this country. You don't have a proper healthcare system here. In America, it's the only Western country in the whole world without some form of nationalized medical system. People can't afford to be sick here. Even middle-class people can't afford to get sick. Or if they get sick and they have a terminal illness, they die and use all the family's money and leave the family bereft. And in Cuba, people have enough to wear. The shops are pretty bare. You can buy rice and eggs and some vegetables, 2 sorts of pants, 1 sort of shoe. And we came back here, and the people are terribly proud of what they've done. It's been a wonderful revolution down there. And I told them they're really Christians about what they've done, because they're helping each other. There's a light in their eye, because they're so proud that they help each other. And they were very offended, because they're not Christian. But they really are. They're helping each other. They said, we're communists. But communism, in its basic sense, is the same as Christianity, because it's helping each other. And that's what we should be doing. And we came back here to Christmas here, and we nearly vomited when we went into the shop, so we're just dripping with luxury. And we had a feeling that if America tightened its belt, it could feed all the people in the world. And I don't know how many people I've spoken to when I travel on aeroplanes. They say, me, I'm not going to spend my I don't want to pay taxes, number one. And number two, I'm not going to spend my taxes helping people have a decent medical care system or decent education. In Australia, our tertiary education is free, paid for by the government, because the government's there to help the people, of the people, for the people, by the people. Your government is here for the corporations. It's of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. And I'm not being radical, I'm just telling you the truth. Just telling you the truth. And you're not using a democracy. This is not a democratic country at the moment. And it's your fault. It's your fault, because you've got a wonderful system here, and it's not being used. It's not being used because people are very comfortable. Why should I vote? Who's your congressman? I don't know. How did he vote on the freeze? I don't know. She, mostly he. Why don't people use their democracy? You don't have a right to have a democracy. People in the world are dying all over the world to have a democracy, in El Salvador and in Guatemala and in South Africa and in Russia and in Poland. And you've got one here and you don't use it. I'm not blaming you, because probably most of you vote. I'm saying it's a general thing about America, okay? So don't take it personally. I want you to take it personally. But I want to get the message over. And in a way, this country's the most powerful country in the world. It could blow up the world or initiate a nuclear war. And so America full of wonderful, kind, loving people who don't know too much about the rest of the world. Do you know a lot about the West Bank? I don't. Do you know a lot about India? I know what I've read. I feel humble. Do we know? I've never been game to get off the plane in New Delhi and see people dying in the gutters from starvation. I've never been game to face it because I'm a physician and I could do nothing about it. But the whole world is seething with this. By the year 2000, there'll be 6 billion people on the planet. The world will be in a terrible state because we're polluting it. Every year, 5 tons of toxic waste are produced for every man, woman and child in this country per year. Why? Because we have to have plastics. Why? Because you put your rubbish in them. And because we have to use cups that we throw away. When I was a girl, there wasn't any plastic. One day, a man came along and said, look at this terrific knob to open a door. It's called nylon. And that was the start of plastics. So we bought it because they told us it would make us happier if we bought more, and we buy more, and it doesn't make us any happier, so we buy more to make us happier. And who makes the profit? The people who make the plastic. And who's dying of cancer? We are. Most of the toxic byproducts have not been tested satisfactorily from a biological point of view. And the tests that have been done by people who work for the EPA. They've been lousy tests. They mean nothing biologically. We're filling up our environment, and the Himalayas are being destroyed. Why? Because the people in India don't have enough fuel to cook their food, so they chop all the trees down. Why don't they have enough fuel? Because we don't help them. And we're concerned about getting oil. And by God, if the Persian Gulf is threatened, we're going to go over there and fight, if necessary, with our rapid deployment force. This country is the only country in the world who can extend her forces beyond her shores. Russia can't. America has 13 aircraft carriers with a whole flotilla of ships around them and submarines to protect the aircraft carriers. It's got a whole lot of huge amphibious ships from which empty thousands of Marines. And they're going to be used for the rapid deployment force in the Persian Gulf if America's oil is threatened. That's not America's oil. That belongs to the countries in the Persian Gulf. That doesn't belong to America. And if America fights in the Persian Gulf, Russia might get involved. If Russia gets involved, America's policy is if they start losing in the Persian Gulf because they need the oil, they're going to use tactical nuclear weapons first against the Russians, because the Russians wouldn't be so crazy as to use nuclear weapons back, because that would start a nuclear war. So America has the right and privilege to use nuclear weapons first. President Reagan told me when I talked to him, we'll use nuclear weapons first, he said. We're going to maintain that policy. That'll stop war. That would start a nuclear war. That would start a nuclear war. A nuclear war could start in the Middle East any day. The CIA says Israel has over 200 bombs. Israel's been helping South Africa build bombs. Colonel Gaddafi might build a bomb soon. He's financing the Pakistani reactor and bomb. I'm rambling a bit, but I've been deeply affected by what I heard tonight. And you know, it comes back to each one of us every day. And really, the fate of the world is in the hands of the United States of America. Right now, it's not in the hands of Russia, although Russia could blow us up any day. And people say, oh, we don't trust the Russians. We're trusting them every minute. We trust them right now. Because by leading the arms race at every step, with the Russians blindly and stupidly copying and following, America set up its own suicide and put this fantastic country into the hands of a few aged, somewhat decrepit, frightened, paranoid Russian leaders and said, here, America's yours. Do with it what you want. Do you realise that? And right now they could say, we're sick of America, we're going to press the button. Or they might make a mistake, because the computers keep fouling up all the time. In this country, they made 151 mistakes in an 18-month period, thinking nuclear war was starting. And the Russian computers are far less sophisticated than the American ones, but Ronald Reagan won't sell them high technology to fix their computers, which might help to stop nuclear war. Anyway, Ronald Reagan doesn't understand too much. I need some water. He doesn't, because I spent an hour and a quarter with him. It doesn't mean he doesn't understand because I spent time with him, but he doesn't. Almost every statement he made to me was absolutely factually incorrect. And when I tried to correct him, his eyes glazed over. And he didn't hear me. And his daughter said, Daddy, I know what Dr. Caldecott is saying is right because I've got a 1982 Pentagon document to prove it. And he looked at her and he said, it's a forgery. You should understand that that man is not very intelligent, clinically. And I'm telling you this as a physician, because that man and another man called Caspar Weinberger, who's the Secretary of Defense, are called the National Command Authority, and they have the authority in this country, those two men, to press the button. Do with that information what you will. I won't make a recommendation, but I have one in my mind. Those two men are the most powerful men in the world, and clinically they're inappropriate for their job. Now, I've got to get on quickly for women and religion. This is the age of women, right? In the last 10 years or 20, we've learned, number one, we're very intelligent. Number two, and as smart as any man and often smarter. Number two, we've learned that emotion is fine and that we're very emotional and we're in touch with our feelings very much, and we cry when appropriate and we laugh when appropriate. I was in the Congress today and I heard a woman crying and everyone was shunning away from her. That's good. If you want to cry, cry. Wouldn't hurt Caspar Weinberger to have a cry now and then. We have a global thinking. We think very globally. We're not tunnel vision. You know, so often I'll give a talk and a guy will come up and he'll say, you know, it's not 572 cruise missiles, it's 571. And a woman will stand there and she'll say, that's the sort of thinking that's going to kill us all. And he says, what? What? The women get it straight away, and I always say an aroused woman is unstoppable. Just can't stop her. Women will get their own way every time. We've got all sorts of techniques we use, some which are legitimate and some which aren't. But when you're trying to save the world, it doesn't matter what sort of technique you use. I'll do anything. Anything. Okay, so what we have to do is teach the men to get in touch with their feelings, but more than that, we've got to take the lead now. And there's a book called A Choice of Heroes by Mark Gerzon, a nice middle-class white male, and he said the world is run by a minority, certainly this country, who are white middle-class Anglo-Saxon males. And so because the country and the world's in such a mess, you have to wonder what the pathology is within this particular minority group. And the pathology is that we have to redefine courage for men. It takes much more courage for a man to look inside himself, admit his fallibility and his emotions, and admit he's made a mistake, and maybe even cry. And for us, that's a strong man, and we're attracted to them, sexually and otherwise. A weak man is a man like Caspar Weinberger, who never admits a mistake, who shows absolutely no emotion as he talks about blowing up the world, and hides behind the defense mechanism and builds missiles. I call it a case of acute missile envy. I think they're trying to prove that they're strong men. And we have to tell them that's not strength, that's weakness, and we don't like it anymore. And they'd better get their act together. So we need to get to their wives. That's called working through the pillow. Now, what about religion? So we have to take the lead and bring the men with us, and the nurturing men will be with us anyway, but the others we have to help, and I'm deadly serious. And the gender gap is frightening the White House. Let's make the gender gap really big, all right? And that way we'll defeat the president next election. We'll fill up the Congress with people who are for bilateral nuclear disarmament. A pledge by all of you. Going to work on that? Because I tell you that we don't have much time left. The world is about to die. The Pentagon has a 5-year plan calling for the capability to fight and win a protracted nuclear war over a 6-month period. To that end, they're building weapons to do that. The MX vote is coming up in 2 months. You must all use your democracy and make sure that MX vote is defeated. How do you do it? Pick up the telephone. I want to speak to Ed Markey. I want to speak to Paul Tsongas, and let them have it. And say, if you vote for the MX, you won't get back next time, because I'm going to guarantee that you won't be re-elected. Nothing scares the politicians more than their political survival. They don't care about too much else. Although Tsongas and Markey are good guys. They're very good guys. So 84 is the key. After that, if we don't stop these weapon systems and we don't get a freeze, I'm going home, because it's too late. It's too late. The weapons they're going to build, the Pershing IIs reach Moscow in 6 minutes. That means they have to use a system called launch-on warning, where computers decide to launch nuclear war. And our beautiful planet, including the Himalayas and the Holy City, will be in the hands of a computer. We've got 1984 to turn it round. Nothing else you do matters. And I'm not denigrating your lives, but nothing else we do matters. If in fact, after 1984, it's too late, and our world will be blown apart by the fissioned atom. We have an incredible responsibility placed on our shoulders by God. We are to protect and nurture God's creation. And every religion says, love thy neighbour as thyself. Not in those words, but they all say the same thing. Do you know what we've got to learn to do? Got to learn to love the Russians. They're the sons and daughters of God. Just what Jean said. They're people. And we've got to stop hating. Because nationalism is now anachronistic. And that's how wars start, and that's how we'll blow up the world. We've got to start living with mutual respect and even love for each other, and it starts in here, in the heart. In each one of us. And next time you get angry with someone, in your family, or someone who's cut you off on the road, know that it starts in here. And start from yourself and work out to everybody else in the whole world. Makes you feel super when you do that. That's God's work. And I know the Americans can do that. And that's your responsibility in the next year and a half. For India, for the Palestinians, for Australia, for every country in the world, because 92% of the people in the world don't live in Russia or America. And they don't give a damn who's got how many or how big they are. All they care about is that our beautiful planet survives. The fission atom will either teach us everything we needed to know about ourselves, or we'll learn nothing and we'll blow up the world. Thank you.
Until 10 o'clock, we'll take a few questions. If you have a question and feel you can't be heard, please step to a microphone. Yes.
I have a question Helen Caldecott. I know just how you feel. I went to Brussels on Women's International League for Peace and Freedom to support. Can everybody hear me? No. Okay, I know. Okay. I was in Brussels when the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom, March 8th, and I know just how you feel. I came back, and the excitement and the relationship that people have is the most inspiring experience that I've had. There were women there from 28 countries, as far away as New Zealand, Australia, even from Turkey. And we spent the day at the university. The second day we marched with them, and they didn't realize that there was a large group. There were 120 of us who went on the peace plane, and they didn't realize American women were very concerned. They're not going to allow the cruise and the Pershing missile to be deployed. They know it's first strike. And then I went on to Manchester, England. They have 188 nuclear-free zones, and they have 11 Greenham Common peace camps. And then there were people from Camiso, Italy, who have a very large peace camp, and we're planning one in Seneca, New York, from July 4th to the end, we're planning one from July 4th to Labor Day. And the reason why Seneca, because that's where they have a large army depot, and they tend to store the cruise and the Pershing missiles there. I'm sure you're aware of that. And I agree with you. I was quite depressed when I came back, but I know that we're not hearing each other. Thank you.
This weekend, I attended the Harvard Alumni College on living with nuclear weapons. Along with many others, I was very disappointed with the conclusions of the group, considered to be very intelligent, knowledgeable, scholarly experts, all men, of course. Except for Professor Hoffman, who seemed to have a little more feeling than the others, the rest assumed a cold, emotionless, detached, non-humanitarian stance, speaking in their own technical and scientific jargon, without any new or visionary ideas, with no message of hope but doom and gloom. I think most of us thought they gave us no suggestions how the average person could go forth and fight for peace, but just sit back and wait for the Holocaust, as long as we and those who are to come after us are alive. The only bright spot of the conference were the women conferees, who vehemently blasted this august group. And I'd like Helen Caldecott or anyone on the panel who has read the book to comment on it. Thank you.
I haven't read the book. I've just been read excerpts from the book, and my husband's reading it at the moment and keeps throwing it down in disgust. I think it is that it comes from emotionless men, and they're some of the men who wrote that are, in fact, some of the architects of the arms race to where we are now. And arms control has been a method to build more weapons. That sort of. They go to war in their arms control talks. They're at war now in the START talks and the INF talks. They're not there with true motivations to get rid of nuclear weapons. They're at war. So.
Just one moment. One more comment on that question.
Yes, I would like to say that I have read the book, and even though there are conclusions in the book with which people might disagree, those conclusions are not really the essential part of the book. As I see it, those writers do respect public opinion, people who bring knowledge to bear, people who bring views and emotions to bear. So that I would not say that the authors of the book would disapprove of public opinion. On the contrary, as far as I can see from that book, they have said that the only thing that will help negotiation will be an informed public opinion. And if I could mention my mother, when she was in Norway to receive a Peace Prize, she spoke along the same lines. She was given a drawing by a young Norwegian boy, and the drawing was of two ladders that were supporting one another. One was the ladder of public opinion, and one was the ladder of negotiation. And if you don't have one ladder or the other, both are going to crumble. And so it's extremely important, and I would say, from my reading of that book, that these authors agree that public opinion is indispensable. Without it, negotiators can do nothing.
Thank you. We have a question here.
Dr. Caldecott, who was the woman crying in Congress? It seems so unusual for anybody to show any emotion there.
It was only a secretary in the hall. I don't know what she was. It's a woman. a secretary. I didn't mean it. It wasn't. I don't think she was a congresswoman.
Oh. I see.
Yes.
Dr. Caldecott, I just saw If You Love This Planet in a small screening in L.A. I was so profoundly moved and wonder if you are able to have a wide distribution of that film. I feel that if everyone saw that film, there would be no more problem.
That film is being distributed by a distributor in Los Angeles, and you can get the film and start showing it yourself. I mean, that's not my business, so it's really up to you.
Cecilia Bach raised the very important issue of nuclear-free zones. I'd like to mention three that interest me particularly. Probably the most important, I think, is the Central European nuclear-free zone, which would reduce the risk of tactical nuclear weapons on 90 kilometers either side of the border. And I hope that maybe if we were willing to reduce our military forces in Germany, perhaps then the Russians might someday be a little more tolerant of dissent in Poland. That's one that perhaps I'd like you to comment on. And the other two are local issues. There is a movement for a Cambridge nuclear-free zone, which would restrict weapons research in this area. And I'm interested in a making Massachusetts the first nuclear weapons-free state, because there is a movement to put cruise missiles in Boston Harbor. Now, on June 25, E.P. Thompson is going to speak on that issue on Boston Common from 1 to 4 on a Saturday. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on the possibility of local nuclear-free zones in Cambridge or Massachusetts. And I don't want to embarrass you after your beautiful statement today, but you may know that Harvard invests in companies that do business in South Africa and that make nuclear weapons. I wonder if you would care to comment on your personal views on this investment question.
Are you talking to me? I will answer the question that was directed to my speech, but I think that you have some things to ask my husband, and it may be a problem to define someone in terms of their husband, so that I will let you ask those questions. As for the nuclear-free zones, first of all, the ones in Europe, because there are different ones being talked about, I would think that all of them would represent steps forward. All of them would separate the warring powers or the powers that might be at war, and I'm all in favor of them. And that has to do, of course, with doing away with nuclear weapons that are very near one another and pointed at one another. With respect to research on nuclear weapons, I think that is a separate question, and it should be looked at as quite separate. I have not seen the specific proposal here in Cambridge, so that I can't tell you exactly which way I would vote on that, but I shall certainly be informed when the day comes.
I think it's about time to stop tonight. I would like to invite all of you back on Thursday night for another panel, this one on the topic of justice. The participants in that panel will be Brigalia Baum, a South African who has been in exile in Geneva for nearly 10 years, perhaps more. Bernadette Musala, a South African who now works in the Department of Home and Family Life for the South African Council of Churches. Julia Esquivel, a Guatemalan theologian and poet who is also in exile from Guatemala. And Nawal El-Sadawi, an Egyptian medical doctor, writer, and feminist who has written the book, The Hidden Face of Eve. So I invite you back on Thursday at 8 o'clock and would like to thank the panelists tonight and hope that all of us in our own way can find ways in which we can hug the trees in the United States and in the world for peace. Thank you.